Boxing gyms are supposed to be places of hard work, discipline, and sweat. But what happens when those late-night training sessions turn into something much darker? Tonight, I'll be sharing chilling stories of boxers who found themselves alone in the gym, only to realize they weren't as alone as they thought. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and get ready, because these stories will make you think twice before training after hours. First story, the shadow in the gym. It was around 11 p.m. when Caleb, an amateur boxer, decided to head back to his local gym for a late-night training session. He often preferred the solitude. The quiet helped him focus on his technique and stamina without distractions. The gym, an old building on the outskirts of town, always had a strange vibe after hours. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, and the shadows cast by the worn-out punching bags seemed to stretch unnaturally in the dim light. That night, Caleb planned to work on his endurance. He wrapped his hands, put on his gloves, and started throwing combinations at the heavy bag. The rhythmic thud of his punches echoed through the empty gym. But as the minutes passed, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. He paused, pulling his gloves off and looking around. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the lights. "Just my imagination," he muttered, shaking his head and getting back to work. Then he heard it, the sound of a speed bag being hit. It was faint but unmistakable, coming from the far corner of the gym. Caleb froze. He was the only one with a key to the building that night. His pulse quickened as he turned his head towards the noise. The speed bag in the corner swung back and forth, the chain creaking softly. But no one was there. Caleb tried to rationalize it. Maybe he hadn't secured the chain properly, or a draft from the ventilation system had moved it. But the air in the gym was still, heavy with the smell of sweat and leather. He walked over to the bag, stilling it with his hand. That's when he noticed it, faint footprints, bare and damp, leading away from the speed bag towards the locker room. His breathing hitched. Caleb wasn't the type to scare easily, but something about those prints made his skin crawl. They were too small to belong to any of the other fighters who trained there and seemed to glisten as if they'd just been made. "Hello," he called out, his voice trembling slightly. There was no response. Gathering his courage, Caleb grabbed a nearby hand wrap and headed toward the locker room, his fists clenched tightly. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges letting out a low groan. The locker room was empty, the lights flickering ominously. As he turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind him. The sudden noise made him jump, and his heart pounded in his chest. He pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Then, from the far end of the room, he heard a faint whisper. It sounded like someone calling his name. "Caleb." He spun around, his back against the door. The lockers were lined up in neat rows, their metal doors slightly ajar, creaking as if someone had just walked past them. But there was no one there. The whisper came again, louder this time, and it was followed by the unmistakable sound of gloves hitting a bag. Caleb's eyes darted to the mirror at the far end of the room. In the reflection, he saw himself, and behind him, a shadowy figure wearing old, torn boxing gloves. The figure's head was bowed, but its posture was aggressive, fists clenched as if ready to fight. Caleb whipped around, but there was nothing there. When he looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. The door suddenly gave way, and Caleb stumbled out of the locker room, grabbing his gear and bolting out of the gym. He never trained there alone again. Weeks later, he learned that decades ago, a young fighter had died in the gym during a late-night sparring session. Some said his spirit still lingered, looking for one last fight. Second story, the knocking bag. Marcus, an experienced boxer, was known for his unwavering discipline. He often trained at odd hours to avoid distractions, especially in the early morning when the gym was empty. That night, he arrived around 2 a.m., determined to refine his movements in the ring. The gym was simple: a few heavy bags hung from the ceiling, a ring in the center, speed bags in one corner, and a small locker room in the back. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, but Marcus was used to it. He turned on a playlist to focus and started his routine. After half an hour of intense training, he took a break to drink water. That's when he heard something that didn't match the music, a rhythmic knocking sound. He removed his headphones and looked around. The knocking continued, thud, thud, thud. It sounded like someone punching one of the heavy bags. But he was the only one there. Marcus hesitated before stepping toward the bags. The nearest one was swaying slightly, as if it had just been used. He steadied it with his hand, trying to stop the movement. Must be the wind, he thought, though he knew the gym's windows were shut. As he turned away, the sound started again, but this time it came from a bag in the farthest corner of the gym. Marcus froze, watching as the bag swung on its own, the rhythmic knocks echoing in the empty space. "Who's there?" he called out, trying to sound firm. No response. He grabbed an iron rod that was leaning near the ring and cautiously approached the bag. When he was only a few steps away, the knocking stopped abruptly. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of his own rapid breathing. Suddenly, a noise came from the locker room, a low, muffled laugh. Marcus froze. The laugh didn't sound human, it was rough and distorted, as if it came from something amused by his fear. He turned to face the locker room. The door was slightly ajar, and the light inside flickered frantically. A chill ran down his spine, but he couldn't stop himself. He had to check. When he pushed the door open, the locker room appeared empty. All the lockers were shut, except for one at the far end, its door slightly open. A strong, metallic smell filled the air, like dried blood. "This is insane," he muttered to himself, but he couldn't resist. He walked toward the locker, his heart pounding so loudly it seemed to echo. When he pulled the door open, he found an old pair of boxing gloves, stained with something that looked like blood. Suddenly, the locker door slammed shut, briefly trapping his hands. He pulled free, stumbling backward, and heard the laugh again, this time, directly behind him. Spinning around, he saw a shadowy figure in the mirror nearby. It looked like a boxer, but its skin was pale, its eyes hollow, and it wore the same blood-stained gloves. Before Marcus could react, the figure punched the mirror, shattering it with a deafening crash. When he looked around again, the figure was gone. But on the floor near the locker, the gloves had vanished. Marcus ran out of the gym that night, vowing never to train alone again. But even now, when he's home at night, he sometimes hears faint knocking, like someone punching a bag, waiting for him. Third story, the Phantom Sparring Partner. Trey was a rising star in the world of boxing, known for his relentless drive and desire to perfect his craft. On a rainy Friday night, he decided to hit the gym after hours for an extra sparring session. The owner trusted him with the keys, and Trey relished the idea of having the place to himself. The gym was eerily quiet as he stepped inside, the only sound coming from the rain tapping against the metal roof. Trey turned on a few lights, illuminating the ring and the nearby equipment. He wrapped his hands, slipped on his gloves, and began his routine with shadowboxing. Minutes passed, and the rhythmic sound of his punches filled the empty space. But soon, he became aware of something odd, another set of footsteps, faint and deliberate, echoing faintly behind him. He stopped, scanning the room. "Hello," he called out, his voice bouncing off the walls. No answer. The gym seemed empty, save for him. Shaking it off as his imagination, Trey resumed his workout. But as he moved to the heavy bag, he felt it again, the undeniable sensation of being watched. He paused, letting the bag swing slowly to a stop. The air felt heavy, charged with an unnatural stillness. That's when he noticed something strange. In the mirror across the room, a shadow flickered near the ring, moving just out of sight. Trey stared at the reflection, his breath catching in his throat. He turned quickly to face the ring, but there was no one there. "Get a grip," he muttered, trying to shake off the creeping unease. He climbed into the ring, planning to spar against the dummy set up in the corner. But as he tightened his gloves, he heard it, a faint, low grunt, followed by the sound of gloves hitting a back. The sound didn't come from him. Trey froze, listening. The grunts grew louder, more guttural, and seemed to circle the ring. A chill ran down his spine as he noticed something out of place. The air around him had grown colder, his breath now visible in thin, white puffs. The lights above flickered, and the shadows in the gym seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. Then, he saw it. The ropes of the ring were trembling, as if someone was climbing in. Trey backed into the corner, his fists raised defensively. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice cracking. The ropes stopped moving, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Suddenly, a figure materialized in the dim light, a man-like silhouette, wearing boxing gloves and shorts, but its features were distorted, almost blurred. The figure raised its gloves, mimicking a boxer's stance. Trey's instincts kicked in, and he swung a punch out of reflex. His fist went right through the figure, hitting nothing but air. The phantom boxer lunged at him, its movements swift and unnatural. Trey ducked and weaved, fighting an opponent he couldn't touch. The figure's blows didn't land, but the force of its presence sent waves of fear through him. As he backed toward the ropes, the figure stopped abruptly, lowering its gloves. It tilted its head as if sizing him up, then disappeared into thin air. The gym fell silent, the lights steadying once more. Trembling, Trey climbed out of the ring and grabbed his bag, not even bothering to change out of his gear. Later, he learned that years ago, a boxer had died in that very ring during a sparring session gone wrong. Some claimed his restless spirit still lingered, challenging anyone who dared step into his domain. Trey never trained at that gym again. Fourth story echoes in the gym. Jake was a retired boxer turned trainer. Though he had left the competitive world of boxing, he still loved the sport and often found himself alone in the gym late at night. One evening, after finishing up with his students, he decided to stay back to test out some new drills. The gym was vast, with rows of heavy bags, a sparring ring, and a few weightlifting benches. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, casting long shadows on the walls. Jake tied his gloves and began working on the heavy bag, his punches landing with sharp, deliberate thuds. As he got into a rhythm, he thought he heard another sound, light, rapid tapping, like someone hitting a speed bag. He stopped mid-punch, turning toward the corner where the speed bags hung. They were still. Shrugging it off, Jake returned to his routine. But the tapping started again, louder this time. His skin prickled as he turned once more, but nothing was out of place. He muttered under his breath, "Must be the pipes," and moved to the ring. Climbing through the ropes, Jake began shadowboxing, his movements precise and methodical. He was halfway through a combination when he felt it, the unmistakable vibration of the ring ropes behind him, as if someone had just climbed in. Jake froze, sweat dripping down his face, and slowly turned around. The ring was empty. "All right, who's messing with me?" he called out, his voice echoing through the empty gym. The air felt heavy, the silence almost deafening. Then, from the corner of the gym, he heard a faint whisper, indistinct but definitely there. It sent a shiver down his spine. Jake stepped out of the ring, walking toward the sound. He approached the corner, where a cracked mirror hung on the wall. In the dim reflection, he saw something, or someone, standing in the ring. It was a shadowy figure, wearing boxing gloves, its face obscured by darkness. The figure was bouncing lightly on its feet, like it was warming up for a fight. Jake spun around, but the ring was empty. When he looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but curiosity got the better of him. He stepped back into the ring, his fists clenched. "If you're here," he said aloud, "show yourself." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the gym lights flickered, and the temperature dropped sharply. Jake's breath came out in visible puffs as the figure reappeared, standing directly across from him in the ring. This time, he could see more details. The figure's gloves were old and frayed, and its body seemed translucent, shimmering faintly under the flickering lights. It raised its fists in a classic stance. Jake instinctively mirrored the movement, his heart pounding. The figure threw a jab, but before it landed, it vanished. Jake stumbled backward, the ropes creaking under his weight. The gym was silent again, but he could still feel the figure's presence, like a weight pressing down on his chest. Without another word, Jake grabbed his bag and bolted out of the gym, leaving the lights on and the doors unlocked. To this day, he avoids late-night sessions, and when his students ask why, he only says, "The gym isn't always empty when you think it is." Thank you for listening to tonight's stories. Boxing gyms are places of strength and determination, but sometimes, the echoes of the past refuse to fade. If you've ever experienced anything strange or unexplainable, whether in a gym or anywhere else, feel free to share your story. I might feature it in a future video. Stay safe, and remember, sometimes, it's not just your reflection watching you in the mirror. Until next time, take care.